what that might look like.
So is it human service centric, or what's the?
In the greater Boston area, the numerical majority of operating nonprofits are human service organizations. We work with arts groups, environmental groups, all kinds of advocacy, policy-oriented groups, healthcare, education. It's a big, complicated nonprofit sector in this region and, of course, nationally.
So it sounds like an easy problem to solve for us. No, I think we clearly would want to. I think you can't think about the human service questions without thinking about the nonprofit entity as a delivery mechanism. But it's certainly hard for our team to sort of think about on the ground. I think that what's helpful is a program like BARI that can kind of consolidate those efforts within a particular community and provide an outlet for the folks who have analytics and technical skills who want to apply their work. So I think that's, we're not a research arm ourselves, but I think that the model certainly, it seems like it's validated here, and I think it's a terrific way of getting some expertise in a place where I think there's both interest in working and there's a need to capture some of that work.
Well, I would love to see shared best practices, maybe through Metro Lab, proliferate throughout various regions, which each have their own nonprofit sectors. So perhaps it's more a matter of replicating the Metro Lab model.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Let's talk about that. I think it sounds good. Yes?
Your early slides were very compelling, showing the impact of railroads and other modes of transportation on reducing travel time, but what's the analog now? What are you going to show on the map about the impact of this way of operating? Is it just a bunch of things that are going to change?
Yeah.
We know that the workforce is pretty effective, but do you see kind of a direction of movement and something to hang your hat on that, we're going from this kind of society to this one? From farms to cities, from, where?
Yeah, no, I think it's right. Hopefully it's not number of Twitter retweets, or that's not the metric, right? I think that there's probably people in the room who could probably pontificate about this better than I could. I think that for one, the autonomous vehicle is going to change our society, and it's going to change our society a lot from a workforce perspective, from a mobility perspective. So I think that in terms of like the overlay of a map, in terms of how the built environment responds to technology change, I think the driverless car is probably the single piece, and a lot of technology components that we look at, whether it's sensors or fiber networks, a lot of those get boiled up into the ability to actually deploy the driverless car because it's so reliant on infrastructure, it's reliant on connectivity and access to spectrum. But I would say that probably the relationship between advancing mobility is probably not linear, right? It has unless maybe Elon Musk disagrees and he thinks that the Hyperloop is going to take us to San Francisco in a few hours or a few minutes. But I'm not going to be the first one to jump in that thing. So I think that the driverless car is probably an example, but I also think there's probably there easily could be a negative story about this. I think that there's a lot of conversations about sort of what are the workforce implications. I think that probably you could look at the picture of the steel mill. Probably you could look at a picture of how our society is going to respond to automation and wonder whether we made the right choice, or maybe there's a policy response. There's some folks in Silicon Valley who have developed these technologies are now experimenting with the concept of universal basic income to see whether universal basic income is a tool to enable people to live fulfilling lives in anticipation of the idea that increasingly technology is just going to wipe out a lot of job opportunities. Those people are also buying properties in New Zealand to get out of the country when the government gets upset at them. So I think there is the possibility of a very negative story. Yes?
About I want to ask a little bit of a devil's advocate sort of question about the urban instrumentation thing. And as you said, right, we've been having this conversation here, and it's really been being led by the city itself about the socio-technical side of this. What does it actually mean for communities to put expensive, technology on every street light in the city? And I guess from your perspective, right, in the conversations you've been a part of, what do you think people believe, the people promoting these things, right? What do you think they see the public value as, right? So if I'm gonna step out of myself and be difficult, right, I might say, okay, so now we know whether it's raining or not on every street corner in the city as opposed to the city. What does that get, right? What does that build in public value, and what do the people who are pitching this to cities, and the cities who are saying, I want to be a smart city, what do they anticipate is the benefit here?
So I think there are real benefits that are possible. So here's the example that always comes up. In one of the previous conversations, Talia was presenting about access to, or how transit operates in the city and access to transit. I think that there's a lot of research about, or there's numbers that suggest that people stuck in traffic, are looking for parking like a third of the time that they're sitting, or the people who are behind the wheel, a third of the time they're looking for parking. And if you solve that with technology, then you would presumably decrease the amount of people who drive by a third. I guess the counter argument is that maybe more people would start driving into the city because it's now easier to find out where parking is available. But I think there are sustainability components. So if we continue to have vehicles that draw on fossil fuels, and we need to solve that, then maybe there are some urban instrumentation solutions. I think there's examples. This picture that I happen to have up, using video analytics at NYU Cusp, looked at just taking a video camera and breaking down the picture into colors and looking at sort of comparison. And the little plumes that you see, the two little lights, are instances of discharge that were illegal discharge of some chemicals that they're able to correlate to particular colors in a highly fractured sort of map of colors that you wouldn't see in a normal video. So this is a video analytics method that captured instances of pollution that you would have never had access to if you were just sitting there inspecting a building. So there are definitely applications to, I think, to sustainability outcomes. How do you address instances of pollution? How do you just know about air quality, and does that lead to more informed government? But I think you're totally right, which is that there's other components that we probably don't need to know. And Nigel, I remember Nigel talking about, he's seems like a skeptic of some of the incredible outfitting of cities with technology, saying, well, what I really need is a sensor to detect where racism is happening, which he was saying in jest, but these sensors are not going to address broader societal problems. So I totally agree. But I think the question for us is, if we're thinking about applied approaches that universities can help inform local governments with, I'd rather address the technology components in an honest way, and try to bring cities to a point where they feel like they can lean on academic research or informed folks who are faculty or grad students or undergrads that know the material, rather than saying we're going to build the racism sensor, because I don't know how you do that. I mean, it's an important question, but it's not necessarily something that we have a potential solution for.
So thanks for the talk. It's not about building a racism sensor so much as it's about understanding the impacts that technologies have on social life. And so you talk a lot about
So yeah, I totally agree, and I think that for in the context of the federal government's role, and I spent time in the federal government and didn't talk about policy to try to have a more optimistic tone. But I think that NSF's Smart and Connected Communities program, which they launched, small funding program, I think emphasized the interdisciplinary nature of what they call smart and connected communities, like the idea of technology interacting with urban issues. I think that there's still progress to be made in terms of really fostering interdisciplinary teams, because I think there is sort of inertia, probably within the academic community, of focusing really on what's new from a technology standpoint, rather than focusing on what's the sort of cross-disciplinary bigger picture. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that there's a lot of societal questions that around technology that are scary. The fact that we have sort of anthropomorphical people in our pockets increasingly is something that I think has certainly detracted from a lot of beneficial components of society and interaction. So I don't have any particularly good answers, but I do agree that it's an important need. I think that it's something that I don't know if folks at BARI have taken that sort of multidisciplinary approach to particular problems, thinking really about the social components, but it's important.
I guess we have time for one more question. We have one last before we wrap up. Any takers? All right, with that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody. Good night. And we will see you bright and early, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll start up again. So it says only one person was ever watching.
That's weird.
Yeah, well, it could just be that we actually were the only person watching.
Maybe.
Yes.